This episode is brought to you by Portland Distro. If you like underground music, movies, and more, go to portlanddistro.com for licensed merch, vinyl, CDs, and more. Plug in the discount code 10OFF, TENOFF, for a 10% discount at portlanddistro.com. Welcome to this week's episode, guys. Glad to have you all aboard. Before we get going, I just want to give a shout out to my friends and family, the horsemen of the podcasting apocalypse. After you listen to this episode, be sure to go and check these guys out. Every day, we've got something for you. Monday, Brandon Legion brings you Horror Wolf 666. Obviously, it's a horror podcast featuring up-and-comers and luminaries within the horror industry. It's all interview-based, and Brandon does a great job telling the stories of these important creators. On Tuesday, we have Into the Necrosphere, brought to you by Jackie Smith. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, this is the only extreme music podcast that I listen to on a weekly basis, so it just happens to be a good friend of mine too. Go out and support. Wednesday is the day that Everything Went Black comes out, and you're listening to the Everything Went Black podcast right now. I come back on Thursday with my co-hosts Jeff Kashid and Mike Scandato for Necromaniacs. We know nothing about filmmaking, nor do we ever pretend to know like we know what we're talking about, but it's just our opinions on old and new horror films. Sunday, Soul Knocks comes at you, brought to you by Karl Haikara. And Karl and I, as you listen to this episode, are embarking on a project, like a split 7-inch, if you will, between our two podcasts. And that's kind of what this is all about. Friendship and collaboration. And I always forget to do this. So please, if you like the show, give us a 5-star review, leave a review, and it helps everything out. It helps us get the word out. It helps everyone. And also, if you want to support the podcast in any other ways, you can join the Everything Went Black Patreon. Been having a lot of fun with that. We have a good bunch of people on the Patreon platform. For as little as $1 a month, you can get access to all the bonus content, which at this point is weekly stuff. Every Friday we have some sort of pick, be it music, movies, or books. Talk about that stuff every week. We have other shows on there, such as Long Shadows, where Ralph and I dig deep into weird fiction. Hollywood Babylon, featuring Evan from Quell. We talk about some film classics from the past, as well as random episodes, new music, and just ruminations on stuff. So it's a pretty full gamut of stuff that we do over on the Patreon. For $5 a month, you have all the bonus content plus early access to the regular episodes. And if you want to sponsor the show, you can join us as a sponsor for $20 a month, and I will give you a custom ad read for your business, your project, your band, whatever it is. You pick it, and it goes into the ad reads. Anyway, on with the show. This episode might not be, how should I put this, as interesting to some of you, and it might be just the thing for others. But anyway, Karl Haikara and I are launching a series that's going to span both of our podcasts. It's called Darkness Weaves. And this is the intro pilot episode to what it's all about. So anyway, if you enjoy dark fantasy, weird fiction, horror, sword and sorcery, like any of that kind of stuff, then this is for you. If you're curious about that stuff and you want to find out about a great author that probably doesn't get the recognition he deserves, then continue listening. If this is not your thing, you can still listen by all means, but you might want to skip this one, and we'll be back next week with something that will hopefully be more of your liking. So over the years, you may have heard me talk about an author called Karl Edward Wagner. And he was a very prolific writer, sort of fallen into obscurity over the years, possibly due to maybe his estate not being proactive in keeping his work in print. So Wagner was born December 12th, 1945, and passed away on October 14th, 1994. He's from Knoxville, Tennessee. Wagner struggled with alcoholism his whole life and passed away due to complications. He was a writer, poet, editor, and publisher. Worked in the horror genre, heroic fantasy, science fiction, and even wrote some crime and westerns. So he covered the whole gamut of genres that I hold dear in my heart. Before going full on into writing, he was trained as a psychiatrist, so he abandoned that field to become a writer full time. And so you ask me, why the hell do you care about this guy? There's been a huge impact made by his work on popular fiction and popular culture that goes way beyond the years when he passed. I mean, he passed in 1994. But you can see his reach into popular culture even as recent as his past decade. Those of you also know that I really love True Detective, and I know a lot of you guys like that series. And Wagner's influence could be seen specifically in the first season of that show. And we're going to get to all this stuff, but I just wanted to give a overview of who he is. Probably his most well-known character is a character called Cain. And he's immortal. He's a sword-wielding adventurer, anti-hero, dark. As a matter of fact, in some of his stories, you don't even know if he's actually the protagonist or antagonist. He does a lot of shady things. He's sort of like on that kind of nihilistic bent. He's immortal, so he's kind of seen everything come and go. All these ideologies come to pass, civilizations rise and fall, and it makes for a very interesting read. And there's also an implication that Cain, Kane, is actually Cain, as in Cain and Abel from the Bible. And that Cain is spelled Cain. It's neither confirmed or denied. It's vague as to whether or not he's the same guy. But anyway, Wagner describes him as this, sort of jacked guy, red hair, blue eyes, beard, very good with swords, but also has a very deep knowledge of the occult and the control of magic. So in a way, he's sort of an aggregate of Conan and Bran McMorn, another one of Howard's characters. I say Bran McMorn because he was more of this kind of brooding, character out there. And there's a bit of that with Cain. And also, there's a bit of Michael Moorcock's Elric, the Eternal Champion. character, because he also is a swordsman, but also relies on magic. Actually, Elric and Cain have a crossover in a story called A Gothic Touch by Wagner. There are a number of Cain novels, and that includes Darkness Weaves in 1970, which we grab the namesake for this podcast from, Bloodstone 1975, and Dark Crusade 1976. And there's a novel that was never completed called In the Wake of Night. And there's a collection, actually, that it compiles 3 novellas called Death Angel's Shadow. And the work that's compiled in this is Reflections for the Winter of My Soul, Cold Light, and Mirage. And there's like a skew, like there's like a whole legion of short stories that he wrote. And a lot of that stuff was collected. None of this stuff is in print, by the way. You'll have to, if you're interested in reading this stuff, which I highly recommend you find any form of these stories and novels, it's all available on the Kindle app, which or the straight up Kindle from Amazon. Be forewarned, the covers for these are abysmal. They're like literally the worst artwork I've seen. It's embarrassing how bad the covers are. Let's put it that way. The original editions of this ones, or at least the volumes that I own from the 80s, all have Frazetta covers. So they're sick. They're just incredible Frank Frazetta artwork adorning the covers of these things. And as far as I know, those editions that came out in the 80s might have been the last publication of those. So a lot of the short stories were collected and published in a magazine called Midnight Sun, which was pretty much devoted it was like a Cain literary magazine that came out. And so that's where it originally appeared. And there's a collection of the short stories that I believe is called Midnight Sun. And you can find all that stuff on Kindle. You can also scour eBay and Amazon and find very high-priced editions of these things. And I don't have hard copies of the short stories. I only have the novels and the Death Angel's Shadow collection of novellas in hard copy. But someday, maybe this stuff will be republished. In 2004, Death Angel's Shadow, the rights to those stories were acquired by Lauren Mouse for film adaptation, but nothing has been produced so far. And that gave me a little bit of hope that maybe something would happen, with Cain. But to this date, there's nothing really in the pipe, so to say. I've always thought that Cain would have been great in comic books, similar to the Conan comics and Kull and Solomon Kane, like all that stuff has been adapted. John Carter of Mars, and I don't know, man, never really caught on to that extent. And maybe someday it'd be nice to see Cain comics or movies or series or whatever. Wagner's horror work, though, is something that is equally as awesome. He's done a bunch of horror stories, and originally they were printed in collections. I mean, I'm sure they appeared in other places. As a matter of fact, I know they've appeared in other places. I have some of those things. Whispers comes to mind, which originally the short story Styx was published in Whispers, I believe. And I have the issue that has that short story in it. And that's the one that has the most impact on True Detective, in my opinion. Also, Blair Witch. I mean, you can watch Blair Witch. You can read Styx. You can look at the artwork of Lee Brown Coy, who is a fairly well-known weird fiction illustrator. And you can see how a lot of that stuff kind of plays into those two things. And Blair Blair Witch was back in the 90s, and True Detective was, the last decade. So Wagner's work has definitely crossed into mainstream culture, and people haven't even known that it was him, and it's pretty clear to me. As a matter of fact, Nick Pizzolatto, in an interview I read with him, cites not only Lovecraft and Robert W. Chambers as influences, but also Karl Edward Wagner. And it made a lot of sense to me when I read that. So the stuff to look for when it comes to Wagner's collections is first and foremost In a Lonely Place, which is back in print, by the way. And that's kind of the crux of this series that Karl and I are doing. In a Lonely Place is back in print. Valancourt Books published it, and the first installment of episodes that Karl and I are going to do is we're going to be going through each one of the stories in this collection. And this has some of Wagner's best work, in my opinion. It has Styx, it has A River of Night Dreaming, it has When Summer Ends, it has In the Pines. This is some of his best work, and it's all back in print. And that's an event, if you ask me. So please, if any of this interests you, go and buy this book, because all I can say is that if enough people show interest, maybe the other stuff will start resurfacing. Maybe people will discover Kane. And that's all I can hope for. That's kind of the point of doing this series that we're doing. Is to raise awareness for a fine author. And it's a short jump, man, from Michael Moorcock, Tolkien even, I would say even Tolkien, Robert E. Howard. It's a short jump from that stuff into the dark fantasy world of Karl Edward Wagner and Kane. So In a Lonely Place, back in print, was really, really hard to find. There's another thing called Why Not You and I, which there's an illustrated version of that, which I own. And that's out there. You can find it. And then there's When Summer Ends, which, once again, includes some of his greatest work. I found a hard copy version of this online. I'm not going to share with you how much I paid for it. It's a little embarrassing, but I just needed to have it, man. And I had the means, so I went out and I bought this thing. And I don't regret it. It's a beautiful hardback edition. It lived in a library for many, many years, so the book is in great condition. And I'm really proud of this thing, and I'm happy that I own it. And it's given me hours of entertainment, and it's been incredible. So essentially, that's a little overview of his horror stories. There's a posthumously published volume called Exorcisms and Ecstasies back in 1997 that came out. I do not have a copy of that. So if anyone knows of this, let me know, and I'll see if I can come up with something. Regarding his horror stories, like I mentioned, Styx, its influence on True Detective and Blair Witch. Now, Blair Witch, I acknowledge I would say it's an important movie. It's not a movie I particularly enjoy, honestly, but I can see in the horror canon, how it fits in, as far as like folk horror and found footage, like that sort of thing, and has its place. I don't know necessarily if the filmmakers were like referencing Wagner directly, or Coy's artwork with the bizarre Styx things they made. But I look at it and I'm like, this screams Karl Edward Wagner to me. So anyway, but yeah, True Detective, 100%, acknowledge it. There's a lot of things that connect to that in addition to the Robert Chambers stuff. And then also Chambers, since we're talking to Chambers, there's a lot of that sort of mythos that Wagner also builds up, particularly in River of Night Dreaming. There's references to Carcosa And you can hear the Yellow King echoes throughout that entire story. And even in the Kane stories, there's references to a lot of Robert Chambers' work, as well as Lovecraft. Some of the names, some of the concepts, the old ones, like that sort of stuff, conceptually rears its head throughout all of his fiction. So in a way, you can correctly say that Karl Edward Wagner is a weird fiction author, as well as a dark fantasy and horror author. So he also wrote some pastiche with other characters. Like we love Robert E. Howard, or at least I do, and so does Karl. We both love Robert E. Howard. Wagner was deep with Conan and Brad McMorn. He wrote 2 novels. One's called Legion of Shadows, which features Brad McMorn, and wrote The Road of Kings, which is a Conan novel. Now, there's also some connections that Wagner has with Robert E. Howard as a publisher and editor. Now, back when I was getting into Conan in the 80s, there was a series of books that came out that collected all of the short stories. Of course, my introduction was the comic books, the Marvel comics. And those are just like, when I discovered those, it ruled my entire world. So then, of course, I found the books. And I started reading the short stories. And these editions all had the Frank Frazetta covers and were edited and in some cases added to by L. Sprague de Camp and Lynn Carter. And that's how I was originally introduced to the Conan character. Wagner went ahead and edited and produced a 3-volume set of the Conan stories restored to the original form as it appeared in Weird Tales. So I definitely applaud that. This is like the real deal, version of the stories, the uncut, unedited, untouched version of the Conan stories. He also edited the long-running The Year's Best Horror Stories collections for Daw Books. And then he ran his own imprint called Carcosa Press, which was devoted to reprinting the old school weird fiction writers from the pulps. And the whole reason why he did Carcosa was because after August Derleth passed away in 1971, he was afraid that this stuff would sort of fade. And Derleth was like a big aficionado scholar of weird fiction. He ran Arkham House, which is a publishing company that put out, all this like old stuff and kept it alive. Wagner's versions of this, he ran a bunch of stuff, and the notable things were Morgenstern and Others. It's the Cave book, Far Lands, Other Days, E. Hoffman Price. And this is the one that I really dig. It's the Worst Things, Waiting, and Lonely Vigils, the Manly Wade Wellman collection. All of these are illustrated. You can see some of Lee Brown Coy's beautiful artwork in there. And so, yeah, that's another thing to look for, out there in the internet land. And, Wagner is a very important guy, I think, in my opinion, especially if you are a fan of this niche of weird fiction, dark fantasy, sword and sorcery, offbeat horror, that kind of stuff. So Karl and I are going to be digging into this world over the next several months, the first of which is the coverage of In a Lonely Place. The first episode of Darkness Weaves will be on Soul Knocks, and we cover In the Pines, which is a lead-off story of this collection. So I kept it short and sweet this week. I hope this piqued the interest of some of you. And if it has, please, by all means, go out there and try to find Wagner's work. Buy a copy of In a Lonely Place. And if you're into this kind of stuff, please, and you're in the Northeast and can travel to South Jersey, come on out to Darklands Festival. That's going to be a lot of fun. That's the weekend of June 2nd. I'll be there. It's put on by Cadabra Records / Gyptera Press, who just put out that new Thomas Ligotti book. I'll be there the entire weekend. I'm just going to be having a grand old time, just hanging out and taking it all in. So please, if any of this stuff interests you, let's support. This is a very, very niche sort of thing. So the more of you that are interested in this stuff, we need the support. So anyway, hope everyone's having a great week. Talk to you soon. Take care.